You don't know how much it's costing you until you actually take the time to look at it or start to make momentum on a payoff strategy and realize how much more money you have because it's not going towards interest payments. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julian. And today we are talking about debt payoff strategies, specifically the Snowball versus the Avalanche. This might be one of the oldest and most frequent popular debates, questions, quandaries, if you will, within the broader personal finance category. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to a couple women actually that we met last week. And so this is 2 weeks in a row, I think. I think last week we had 2 speaking engagements. We were in New Orleans.
The
week before that we were in New Orleans. And then last week we were in Brownsville, Texas, which is...
No.
I'm sorry, not Brownsville, Texas.
Brownsville, Tennessee.
I knew I was going to do that eventually because in my mind, Brownsville, shout out to my people from Brooklyn, they know like Brownsville is a Brooklyn thing. And then I learned through the grapevine that it was Brownsville, Texas. And I'm sure there's several others.
It was just written about by Axios. That's a different podcast episode, but yes.
I'm giving a shout out to Brownsville, Tennessee. We were there last week for the Family Wealth Summit, which was a really, really cool event that the city of Brownsville, in collaboration with a few other folks, put together and invited us to be a part of. We met quite a few people there. I would say 2 in particular, at least maybe 3, but 2 really left a mark for us. One of them just left a comment on our Facebook page. I believe her name was Quante. And it's interesting because she had a question about debt payoff strategies. And we were like, oh, we're actually getting ready to record a podcast about that. So this conversation is for you, Quante. And for anyone else that probably didn't have the courage to ask those kinds of detailed questions. It's also interesting because it feels like we should have had this conversation or recorded a podcast like this a long time ago.
We weave it into podcasts,
we do,
but we've never
gone deep.
We talked about it when we told our story about how we paid off $200,000 of debt.
Yeah.
And that continues to be one of our most popular episodes, at least on the audio version. And so when I thought about what we wanted to talk about this week, it really was top of mind because summer's over and we're in that brief period of time where you're looking at the bills from summer. You know, you still got to pay off Prime Day, back to school shopping, that vacation that you took, and then knowing that in 3 months, the holidays are coming up. Oh, yeah. And so you about to run it up again. So you really have this like 3-month window to focus, and you don't necessarily have to pay it off, but you should be paying it down because you already know what's about to happen come November. You already know all them sales are going to be too enticing, or, you know, the kids need whatever they need. So I thought it would be great, especially considering the current debt numbers. I don't know if you've looked, not the government debt, because we already know that's out of control, but like individual household debt, record high. American households carry almost $18 trillion in debt as of Q2 2024. Yeah. And it averages about $104,000 per household. So about 6 figures on average. Now, I will say about 70% of that 18 trillion is mortgage debt. These are homeowners that haven't fully paid off their houses yet.
Yeah.
But credit cards have been surging as well. As of Q2 2024, there is $1.1 trillion of credit card debt, with the average balance being about $6,500 per cardholder. Now, remember, that is the average, not the median. So about half the people are above that, half people are below. Yeah. And that's per card holder, not per household.
Yeah.
So if it's 2 of y'all in your house, you probably are staring at upwards of, $13,000 of debt on your credit card, bearing that high interest rate.
Yeah, I mean, credit card debt is as American as baseball, American pie, hamburgers, hot dogs. It's our way of life. Our country was sort of built on an unpayable debt really at this point. But like, this is it's a way of life. And I don't mean to diminish it, but I do think, and we've alluded to this in several previous episodes and conversations, that there's certainly a sense of normalcy that a lot of people have had. In part, this is because of the lending environment. It's very easy for people to go into debt. And so it is it's as common as a common cold, right? Like you still go to work.
Yes.
Right. Unless things get really, really bad, and then you can adjust it that way. But like, it's not a major issue. But I do think, for those who start to pay attention to it, you start to really understand the emotional toll that it takes on, your body and your brain, your spirit, your ability just to kind of think straight or to even be optimistic. It's very difficult to do that, which I think is part of the reason why so many people prefer to just ignore it or accept that it will never be paid off, that it is just a way of life, no different than, that little hook, little toe that you got, whatever it is that you got going on. But like you just sort of accept it. And it's unfortunate, but like it certainly was one of those things that will impact and in some cases guide your decision making, right? I
For
think
sure.
especially when you decide to start paying it off, because I think the approach is typically I'm going to do everything and anything possible, and in some cases unreasonably, to start paying it off. And that's when you start to see like people burning out, flaming out, and all
Yeah,
these other kinds of issues. Sometimes things work out well and it creates a new set of habits and beliefs that people can build on top of and then kind of take things to the next level. But the act of paying it off is without question a difficult one, which is why those who are able to do it kind of celebrate that moment. We've certainly been there. And I think it's one of the most meaningful, important, memorable moments of your life, not just your financial life, just your life in general. And so hopefully more people get to experience that. If you're just starting out, hopefully we can kind of help you at that first fork in the road, which is really that decision around what approach, what strategy should you take? Because that was her question. And I'm not going to lie, like when she asked it, I was like, what do you mean? But I oftentimes naively forget that like not everybody lives and breathes this stuff like we do. And so it's important to kind of take a second to stop, think about it, explain it in a way that hopefully makes sense and then leads someone to then pick a path.
yeah. The goal of this episode is not to shame you or to further stigmatize having debt. To your point, it is completely normal, especially after the last 3 years that we've gone through. But there are a lot of people that are naive about a strategy to get rid of it. And so it just compounds in the wrong direction. And you don't know how much it's costing you until you actually take the time to look at it or start to make momentum on a payoff strategy and realize how much more money you have because it's not going towards interest payments.
Yeah, and before we get into it, I'll also add because it's tons. We didn't talk about this. I don't think we have plans on talking about it, but this is not something that's unique to low income households either, right?
Right.
Like this is actually something that's pretty common in high or
Well,
upwardly
more common.
mobile, right,
You need high incomes
households.
to get high credit limits.
And I think this is where the normalcy comes from. You just start to see it as another bill, but you've got the money, you pay it off, or you pay a certain amount off, and then you just keep it going. And what happens is people get blind to the details a little bit.
Yeah.
So they don't really know what they're doing. They're just managing the cash flow, going back to the previous conversation, without an actual plan in place or way to plug the book without like an actual purpose or clarity or strategy around that income. And so hopefully this is a conversation that for some people you may be revisiting, but for others, if you're just starting out or just thinking about what the approach or strategy should be to pay off the debt, because you want to be one of those people who can look back and tell that story, hopefully this can help you figure out whether or not you should be zagging, zigging, or both.
All right. So we're going to cover both strategies. And I'm going to start with the snowball method because it's my favorite. I'm biased. So the snowball method is called that because it's like building a snowman.
I've never built a snowman.
Well,
Maybe that's why this has never resonated with me, but go
it
ahead.
should be called the snowman method instead of the
That
snowball
might
method.
actually help it make more sense in my mind because I get, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you basically start small and then you watch it grow. And if you use this method, you would start with paying off the card or the debt that has the smallest balance first. So the psychology behind it is all about small wins, motivation, momentum. We used to work with a leader that used to call it Big Mo. And he would be very excited when there was some big mo in the numbers, where it's like, if there's momentum, you got to keep going. If
Yeah.
you high, you don't stop shooting. And that's really the purpose of the snowball method, is to get you going, to get the party started.
Yeah, it is. It's an alternative, I would say, to the other one for sure. Like they could not be more opposite, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's just break down an example. We haven't done this in a while, so now I feel like I'm standing in front of a whiteboard a little bit. But let's use an example. So we're gonna make up someone. Her name is Tasha, She is a 32-year-old graphic designer. I don't know why she's a graphic designer, but that's what she wants to do.
Why would you say that?
Well,
You're going to offend all of our listeners
oh
who are
no,
graphic
I wasn't
designers.
saying it like that. I know several graphic designers. I
Oh,
was just
yeah.
saying it
She's a
like,
graphic
we're just speaking
designer.
of graphic design. She could have been a dog worker. Who knows? But she's a 32-year-old graphic designer. She has $20,000 in debt, right? Combined, spread out over a number of different sources. And so let's say they are broken down as such. The $20,000 is in part $1,000 from credit card A with an 18% APR. She has another credit card we'll call B with $3,000 balance on it, which has a 22% APR. She has a car loan, which is $12,000, and that has a 6% APR. And then she has a personal loan of $4,000 at 10%. So she's got 1,000 credit cards, then another one with 3,000, then a car loan with 12,000, which brings us to 16. And then you've got 4,000 for personal loan. So in total, $20,000, and you've got a variety of APRs, 18%, 22%, 6%, and 10%. Now, if Tasha chooses the snowball method, she's not really going to be looking at the APR. She's not really concerned with which one of these loans are earning more interest. She's more concerned with what you said, building Big Mo. So she's going to start with the smallest balance first, which is the first credit card A, that $1,000 balance. Her job, her focus, her first target is going to be to pay off that $1,000 as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is because there is a lot of data, a lot of research that says this has the greatest impact for sustainable success. For people who have the better chance of actually paying off all the debt, using this approach has tended to work out a lot better for them. The act or the idea of seeing 5 debtors be reduced to 4 and then 3 more quickly, right? So let's say that starts to happen. She bangs out that $1,000 in 3 months and then the $3,000 in 2 months. That does more for her psychology, and her sense of accomplishment is enough to make her feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've done this in 4 months, 5 months, however long it is. And so this is why a lot of people choose the snowball method. This is why Dave Ramseyites, financial peace, university graduates prefer this method, is because it's a lot emotionally to look at that $20,000. And again, regardless of how much you earn, like it's really about how much you can keep at the end of the day. Like it can be very discouraging to look at it. It just looks like a mountain that you'll never be able to climb. But when you start to make that kind of progress very early, people can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's enough in most cases to like get people to the end. And then they feel really, really good about themselves when they do.
Yeah. So I'm definitely Tasha. As someone who struggles with dopamine, which is the brain chemical that you need for motivation, and which is something that I lack with ADHD, this is my jam, right? It's quick wins for momentum, for motivation, which is not something that I can count on happening naturally.
Yeah.
It's simple. Like you don't have to do no math. You just start with.
You do simpler math. You still have to do some math.
You just put them in order. Yeah,
exactly.
Like
but no, I know what you mean.
Least to greatest.
Yeah.
And it can improve your credit score faster because your accounts are paid off. Now, the downside of something like this is mathematically, you may actually pay more interest over time.
Yeah.
And so it could take longer to pay off your debt. Like even if Tasha focused really hard to pay off the $1,000 credit card in 3 months, she still got another 1.5 to 2 years before she knocks out those other 2, because she's doing it in this order and those interest rates are higher. So yeah, if without addressing that high interest debt very quickly, you may actually end up stretching the amount of time that you're actually paying the debt. And
you
for
could
some
end
people,
up paying more in debt.
You do. You end up in a lot of ways. You could. I'm going to caveat, because there are people who I know will pull out their calculators, but you could end up actually paying more, but you have the momentum and you're doing more than what you were doing before, which was ignoring it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're not going to get into like which one is right or wrong. Like, you know, I think this is a matter of personal preference. You do what works for you. Because I mean, again, using you as an example, let's say you're Tasha, you know, if we were to force you to take the alternative approach, the debt avalanche method, and you get burnt out and then you stop focusing on the debt and then you as a result start to just accumulate more, like that's ineffective as well. Right. And so while this might be a bit of a leaky bucket approach, or what a lot of people refer to as, it's like, you know, just kind of focusing on one thing in the front of the house, but the window is open with the AC, you know, or like
I'm
the
someone
back door
who rides
is open
in the car with the windows down and the AC on.
Right.
That's why I don't mind this method, because it's like, I understand some air is going to get out, but that balance
Yeah.
is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, yeah. I want the breeze in front of me, but I don't want it to be too cold,
Right.
Whereas some people are like, no, it's about getting the car
Efficient.
cool
Yeah.
and then reducing the lag on the, radiator or whatever it is. I don't know anything about cars, but that's really sort of the snowball approach. Okay, so pivot. Let's talk a little bit about the debt avalanche method. I'm biased as well. This is how I learned about it. And I actually didn't even learn about this from a standpoint of personal finance. I remember taking a corporate finance class and learning about interest rates and then thinking about, like, I think it was like bond payments. And that's when, for whatever reason, it all kind of clicked to me,
Yeah.
where I started to understand like the role that interest rates play. And going back to what you were saying around not having to do any math, it's not that you don't have to do any math with the snowball method. The math that you're doing is a little simpler. You're ranking to see what the total balance is, and you're focusing on the smallest one first. When you do the debt avalanche method, you have to look at the interest rates. You need to calculate what the total amount of interest for each of those particular loans, and then you let that dictate what you're actually going to start paying off first. And so in the case with Tasha, let me go back to the numbers. You're not looking at the $1,000, the $3,000, the $12,000, or the $4,000. You're looking at that APR, and you're looking at the credit card B, which has a 22% APR. And you're saying, because this card is earning more interest per cycle than any of these other loans or debts that I owe, I'm going to focus on chopping down that $3,000 first. And once I pay off that $3,000, which again, a lot larger, 3 times as larger than credit card A, it's going to take you maybe 6 9 months, I'm just making it up, to actually pay off that $3,000. But when you're done, you're then going to have a larger sort of relief, a larger shovel to then start focusing on the next highest interest rate, which would then be credit card A, which you owe 18% on. And at this rate, she only owes $1,000. She could be able to pay that one off probably in 2 months, just making it up, right? And so that is really the avalanche method. It's not looking at the credit card balance, it's looking at the actual APR. And if you really want to get specific, like any other fees that might actually be impacting what Tasha might be actually paying on each of those cards, but you're looking at the granular details and using that to your advantage to then structure and place in order which debt you are actually going to pay off first. I was going to go through another example. We've got a kid named Isaiah who's a software engineer, but I think generally speaking, like, you understand the path here, right? So Snowball, we're looking at the balance owed and we're putting that in order and focusing on the smallest balance first. With the Avalanche, we're looking and calculating the interest owed per balance, regardless of how big the balance is, and focusing on paying that amount off first. If you do that, let's say we would compare them apples for apples, both with no gaps in terms of payments. Strategically, you're going to pay less in interest with the avalanche method than you would with the snowball method, right? Because you're focusing on paying off the biggest ones, the enemy, the ones that are earning interest against you. You're focused on paying those off first, and then eventually paying off, or lastly paying off, the smaller ones. And that's really why I just had a preference for it, because I'm a little bit more comfortable, I think, being a long-term thinker. Like, I just have a little bit more, I think, natural discipline and resilience. So for me, like, that just seemed like the more logical approach.
Yeah, I think it's the most mathematically optimal approach. And to your point, it's going to motivate people who are not necessarily motivated by activity, but are motivated by strategy. In
Yeah.
this method, you're motivated by the money that you're saving. It's not just a matter of you paid it off in 3 years. It's like, I paid it off in 3 years and I saved over $2,000 in interest,
Right.
which counts as a raise or something that I can use to get something that I want, right? Now, with this method, it may take longer to see tangible progress, but at the same time, there's a prize at the end of the rainbow, or whatever the phrase is, right? It requires more discipline and long-term focus, but there are lots of people who that's their jam.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree with, like, it taking longer to see tangible progress. I think it just depends on how you're measuring progress, right? Some
Yeah.
people do get a lot of dopamine or value from, like, you get that envelope, you see how much you owe, or there's 5 emails that you got to respond to, or, you know, whatever it is. Like some people really just find a lot of value in like reducing that from 5 to 4 to 3 very quickly. Some people really don't care about that. They're just focused on the overall numbers and the big picture, and that's what really matters to them.
Yeah.
I think about it the same way I do real estate investors, where people start to say things like, "Oh, I've got 20 doors." I don't care how many doors you have. Like I'm that guy, right? Like it's like I don't really care how many doors you have. It's about net profit. But some people really want to get to 50 doors because in their mind, like that's the big goal. And it's like, all right, I get that. If that's your motivation, either way, more power to you. I'm sure you will get there. But I was always much more of a guy. Like I'd rather have 10 doors debt free that pay me the equivalent if I had 50 doors with 50 notes against them and had to do all this other management to kind of pay off the debts or manage the debts associated with each of those. And so
Yeah.
that's been my approach. Who's to say whether it's right or wrong? I think it's really a matter of what works for you, what's
Exactly.
most effective for where you are at any point in your life.
Exactly. It's like choosing a cozy, comfy sweater, which is the snowball method, or choosing a high tech jacket, which is the avalanche method. Both of those things have function. It really just depends on what you're looking to do. If you're someone who struggles with willpower or needs regular reinforcement, then you're a snowball person. If you are someone that's motivated by long term financial goals, and if you prefer to do the most mathematically optimal version, then you're an avalanche person. But I think the biggest tip is to really think about how your income and expenses can accelerate each method.
Right.
So, like with the snowball, you can use windfall money to really accelerate those payments because you can knock out small debts with things like a bonus from your office or, a tax return, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can use that to just kind of kick off a couple of those small debts. And then with the avalanche method, you can use debt calculators to really figure out what makes sense and when. And you can consider balance transfer options. So if you're someone that's playing the interest rate game, you can look at a balance transfer to slow down the interest and kind of offset what you may think is not great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, like this is so much of a matter of understanding yourself, right? And
Yeah.
I think if you're trying to figure out, because what we oftentimes run into is people aren't really clear. Like, how do I know which one is best for me? And it's like, well,
Only you can know.
right. Like it's very difficult for me or anyone to ask or to answer that question for you. But I would say if you're looking for a bit of an inkling as to what might work best for you, then think about, if you were to get a promotion at work, like how do you handle or manage the approach to getting that job? There's some people who, yeah, at least for me, right? Like when I would get a new job, I mean, I start working on that job before day one. Like
Yeah.
I'm early, I'm thinking about it strategically. Like I have a plan for myself. Other people aren't doing that. They show up and they're just kind of, not to say it's wrong, right or wrong, but like they just expect to be welcome. They easing themselves into the job and just really
Yeah.
more so around walking around and shaking hands and kissing babies. And then they'll eventually, get to being a master at that particular role. But that was never me. Like I
Yeah.
always wanted to make sure that whatever it is that's expected of me, that's the baseline. I'm already thinking above and beyond. I'm thinking bigger. And again, like, and this speaks to how driven I guess I am. I think compared to some people, I don't think it's that way, but that's just how I am. Anytime I started a job, I was already thinking about what the next job was going to be.
Right.
Like on day one, like I'm happy to be there, but I recognize that it is a stepping stone to whatever comes next. And I would always, always, always like, I would remember screenshot or take pictures of like the welcome email because I'm like setting a timer in my head. It's faint, but like I'm already thinking about the next step. But let's say it's not a promotion. It's the same thing with like, let's say you were given like some diagnosis about some type of health issue. People handle that in very different ways. There's some people who say, immediately like, oh, well, my mama had that, it just runs in my family. It is what it is. I'll stop eating at this place so much, or I'll make some slightly different things. And then there are other people who say, oh, nah, like, I'm aggressively going to manage these things. And, it's not to say that one is right or the other is wrong. I mean, like, it's not going to stop, you might find that being aggressive is just going to make you miserable
Yeah.
or is going to be more expensive or there's going to be some other kind of issue that you're dealing with. But everyone's intensity level and dealing with things is important. It's about getting to the end goal.
And it's
And
about
like,
breaking that pattern of thinking of this as just normal, just the way that
correct.
life is, because it only gets more expensive the
Right.
more that you do that. And so sometimes it's helpful to take a situation that does require some level of intensity, whether it's trying to get promoted at work or trying to reverse a medical diagnosis. Thinking about how you would apply your energy and your focus and your dedication about that thing to your debt will help you figure out which method works for you. And it may be a combination of both. That's
Yeah.
completely okay. For us, it was definitely a combination of both. There were periods of the year where we just needed momentum. We needed to know that we were making progress. And then there were other periods where it's like, we're not going to be outside anyway. Like, let's go ahead and tackle
Exactly.
the avalanche method. Let's
Exactly.
find a side hustle or let's sell something from the house that will knock out one of these expenses. Like, we would just get creative
Yes.
because we were thinking in a period like the 3 months that I'm talking about between now and Thanksgiving, where it's like, all right, now's the time to clean up shop because you know what's coming.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad you said that because there's such a tendency for people to, Americans don't do nuance very well. Like, I'm either this or that, and it's like, no, like you have to be and should be mindful and aware of both approaches and then have the ability to flex up, down, or make one decision over the other based on where you are in life. I think about it the same way we started talking about it being the end of summer. And literally this morning, I got that first, it's like one of my favorite feelings of the year, that first kiss of fall. Like you wake up and it's kind of cool. I'm like, oh yeah, fall's coming. Thank God. Cause it was blazing hot this summer. But I also know that this is like, all right, I got to start changing. Different foods are going to be available. This is also cold and flu season. You're going to have to figure out, what we can do to make sure that we have everything that we need. And I think about it the same way I think about chicken soup, right? Like, I know our son's going to get sick. The whole house is going to get sick once, maybe twice. And I've got to figure out how I'm going to make some chicken soup. I can go to the store and get some Campbell's chicken soup. It is what it is. It's quick. It's respectfully nobody's favorite, but it gets the job done in 2 minutes or less. You crack open a can, put it in the microwave. Our son will eat it and he'll be fine. But there's a big difference between like when I make chicken soup that's fresh, and I mean like fresh, fresh. So like I have, take the long route for a second. Throughout the year, when I'm buying chicken wings, you know this, but I'm sharing it with our audience. I'll buy 3-piece chicken wings and I'll cut that into like, what was it, drumsticks and flats. And then that third wing, which really doesn't have a lot of meat on it at all, I just start to store them in a little freezer bag. And after a while, I got this big old bag of like chicken wings and bones. And then a couple times a year, I make this big batch of fresh chicken stock. Takes time. Obviously, it takes storage. It takes coordination to do this maybe 5, 6 times throughout the year. But when I'm done, I can make like fresh, delicious, rich, really, really good chicken stock. When I make chicken soup with that stock, it doesn't last a day because like that's all he wants. He wants it for snack, doesn't matter. He want it again for dinner, and we're done in like 2 days.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he, I believe I'm a little biased, but I think like it has the medicinal effect significantly higher than it would than like a can of chicken noodle.
Right.
Right now, in the interim, if I don't have that or if I don't feel like making that big batch, I can also just go to the store and buy like chicken broth or chicken soup. That's still pretty good. It's not as good as the fresh. So all of that to say, right? If the goal is to make chicken soup because somebody is sick or you just kind of need that good old tasty hearty feeling, you've got options. I know I can go get a quick can. I know I can get the semi fresh version, and I know that I can make something from scratch. But depending on if it's 4 o'clock and I got to make dinner for 7, I'm not going to make chicken stock from scratch. And I think this is a similar approach when it comes to like trying to figure out which path, right? You've got options and you should be able to employ either one of those options based on whatever the context of the situation requires. But it's on you to kind of be aware of both as opposed to being so laser focused on one that you miss out on an opportunity to still make progress, even though the situation may not necessarily be ideal.
Yeah. So here's my advice, my final takeaway. If you are someone who is frustrated and struggling with your debt and you're not happy with the strategy that you've been using, which is sending a little bit of money here, a little bit more over here, a little bit more over here, this is a great time to step back, reassess your strategy, create a realistic budget, and just think for the next 90 days, right? Don't
Right.
think about the big $20,000 number or the big $90,000 number. Just think about what's realistic in 90 days. Can you knock out one of the small debts just by paying the minimums on everything else and getting that off your plate by Christmas?
Yeah.
Can you figure out how to use a debt calculator to know how much money you're spending on high interest debt and saying it'll take 8 months, but by month 8, we will have a $600 raise in our household, which we can use to accelerate and pay off and prevent us from getting into further debt. That's really the attitude that you have to go into it with. You got to find areas where you can cut expenses. And I'm talking down to the bone, whether it's cloud storage or streaming or reducing the number of name brand groceries that you have while avoiding taking on debt, while figuring out if there's anything that you can liquidate or sell or take on as a side hustle to generate some extra income. But just focus on the 90 days, because I'm telling you, if the last 3 to 4 years has been any indication, this is going to be another record year for holiday spending. And all it's going to do is just add on top of the pile that you already have. So let's try to bring it down. Let's try to do something, productive for the next 90 days, and let us know how it turns out.
Yeah. I mean, in the spirit of overall wellness and to selfishly squeeze in another metaphor, it's very similar to the workout, right? You might not be able to get a 1 hour high intensity workout in, but if all you got is 20 minutes, it's more important to get that quick 20-minute walk in or burpees or stretching or Pilates or, kettlebells, whatever it is. It's actually more important long term for you to continue with a nice, good, solid 20-minute workout than it is to skip it because you couldn't do the full thing or
Right.
whatever you consider to be the right thing. And so this is about progress. This is about staying, on task and not falling off, because that has more long-term negative impact on your overall financial health than anything else. And so hopefully you feel a little bit more clear on what your options are, and hopefully you have license and reason to pick one over the other, or to even fortify why you might have chosen one over the other. But at the end of the day, if progress is being achieved, then congratulations, because that is the goal.
Yes. All right, y'all. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, let us know by leaving a 5-star rating and review, or drop a comment below, and we will keep the conversation going. We will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.